Hey guys, tonight we leave the safety of medieval city walls and step directly into the kind of travel experience that makes modern airport delays feel like a luxury spa retreat. The sun is already sinking behind crooked rooftops, the gates are beginning to close, and you're standing there with a small pack, sore feet, and the deeply unfortunate confidence of someone who thinks, how dangerous can a road really be? Which is adorable, honestly, because medieval Europe is about to answer that question very aggressively. You probably won't survive this. Statistically speaking, neither would your horse. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, comment your location and local time below. I always love seeing where everybody's listening from while we wander through history together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The city gates groan shut behind you with the heavy finality of a prison door, except now you are outside the prison, which turns out to be much worse. The road ahead stretches through darkening countryside, muddy and uneven beneath your boots. Thin fog drifts across open fields while the last orange streaks of daylight fade into grey. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks. Somewhere farther away, another dog answers. And then from deep within the trees ahead comes the sound everybody in medieval Europe recognises immediately. Wolves. Not always real wolves, of course. Sometimes bandits. Sometimes drunk peasants. Sometimes actual wolves having what sounds like a very emotional group discussion. The uncertainty is part of the fun. Travel in medieval Europe is dangerous before you even take 10 steps beyond town. Historians estimate that most ordinary people rarely travelled more than a few miles from where they were born. A nearby village already feels foreign. Another kingdom feels practically mythical. Roads exist technically, but road often means a wide scar of mud carved by wagon wheels and bad life choices. The Romans once built magnificent stone highways across Europe, some so durable that parts survive even today. But centuries after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, many routes deteriorate badly. You walk atop broken paving stones swallowed by weeds and dirt, like ancient civilization itself is slowly sinking underground. Medieval rulers talk constantly about repairing roads, which is ruler language for someone else should really handle that. Rain begins almost immediately. That is another important lesson of medieval travel. The weather hates you personally. Cold drizzle slips through your wool cloak. Mud grips your boots with the enthusiasm of a tax collector. Every cart that passes sprays filthy water onto your legs. Your horse, assuming you're lucky enough to own one, smells damp and offended. The road becomes darker by the minute while distant lantern lights flicker weakly behind you near the city walls. Ahead, there is almost nothing. No streetlights, no inns for miles. No helpful roadside signs saying rest stop in 2 minutes. Medieval travellers navigate through memory, rumour and occasionally sheer optimism. You ask directions from farmers who gesture vaguely toward forests and say deeply unhelpful things like, just follow the old road until the dead oak tree. There are always several dead oak trees. You keep walking anyway because stopping outside after dark is often worse. Travellers huddle together when possible, forming little temporary groups for protection. Merchants, pilgrims, wandering monks, messengers, and suspiciously quiet men carrying sacks all move cautiously along the same roads. Nobody fully trusts each other, but everybody fears isolation more. A tall pilgrim beside you mutters prayers while clutching a scallop shell attached to his cloak. Pilgrimage becomes incredibly popular during the Middle Ages. Thousands travel toward holy sites like Rome, Canterbury, or Santiago de Compostela. Some genuinely seek spiritual salvation. Others flee debts, crimes, or awkward marriages. Medieval roads are basically crowded with people having complicated personal situations. The pilgrim warns you not to whistle at night because spirits supposedly follow the sound. This is the sort of travel advice you receive constantly. Some medieval people genuinely believe crossroads are haunted gathering places for demons and restless ghosts. Others nail horseshoes above indoors to repel evil. In parts of Europe, travellers carry tiny charms made from animal bones or saint relics for protection. Historians still argue whether ordinary people truly believed every superstition, or simply treated them as comforting habits during frightening journeys. Either way, you notice almost everybody carries something lucky. You probably should too. The darkness thickens. Trees crowd closer to the road now, their branches bending overhead like skeletal fingers. Your group instinctively walks faster. Forests terrify medieval travellers for good reason. Dense woods shelter criminals, deserters, runaway serfs, and hungry animals. Royal authority fades quickly beyond city walls. Once you enter the trees, law enforcement becomes more of a philosophical concept. Then you hear footsteps behind you. Not your group's footsteps. Different ones. Faster. Nobody speaks. The pilgrim grips his walking staff tightly. One merchant quietly slides a knife from beneath his cloak. The sound grows nearer through wet leaves and sucking mud. A figure emerges from darkness. Everyone freezes. It is merely a teenage boy driving 2 goats down the road, looking equally terrified of all of you. The collective relief is almost embarrassing. The merchant slowly hides his knife again while pretending he never panicked. The goats stare at everybody with the cold, emotional detachment only goats truly master. You continue onward beneath dripping branches. Hours pass slowly in darkness. Your shoulders ache from carrying supplies. Your stomach growls. Every distant sound becomes suspicious. Medieval nights feel enormous without modern light pollution. The sky stretches overhead with impossible clarity whenever clouds part. Stars blazing above empty countryside. Beautiful, yes, but also deeply unsettling when you realise how tiny your little group looks beneath that endless darkness. Far ahead, finally, a warm orange glow appears. An inn, or possibly a barn pretending to be an inn. Medieval standards vary wildly. The building crouches beside the road beneath crooked wooden beams. Smoke curls from the chimney while exhausted travellers crowd near the entrance. You can already smell wet straw, roasting onions, wood smoke, sweat, and ale. Honestly, after hours outside, it smells magnificent. Inside, the common room roars with noise. Merchants argue over prices. A monk snores beside the fire. Somebody suspiciously stains the corner floor with vomit. Fleas leap enthusiastically between sleeping dogs. The innkeeper eyes you carefully, calculating exactly how much money can be extracted from your misery. And despite everything, the wolves, the darkness, the mud, the endless fear, you feel overwhelming relief just being alive long enough to reach shelter, which for medieval travel counts as a genuinely successful first day. Morning arrives damp, grey, and deeply disappointing. You wake tangled in itchy blankets while somebody nearby coughs with the dramatic intensity of a man trying to expel his soul through his lungs. The inn's common room smells stronger in daylight. Wet wool, stale ale, smoke, onions, mud, horse manure drifting through the shutters, and approximately 300 years of poor ventilation. A dog sleeps directly on your foot. Honestly, it might be the cleanest thing in the building. Outside, rain taps steadily against warped wooden walls. Of course it is raining. Medieval travel depends almost entirely on weather, and weather in Europe behaves like an irritated landlord determined to make your life difficult. A single week of heavy rain can turn roads into rivers of mud. Entire wagons vanish axle deep. Horses break legs. Merchants lose fortunes because one countryside path decides to become soup. You pull on cold boots that never fully dried overnight and step into the yard. The mud immediately swallows half your foot with a moist slurping sound that feels strangely judgmental. Nearby, 2 merchants argue beside a wagon whose wheel has collapsed sideways. This is not unusual. Most medieval roads are unpaved outside major cities. Even important trade routes often resemble damaged farm tracks gouged by years of carts and hooves. In dry weather, they become choking clouds of dust. In wet weather, they transform into endless brown glue. Chroniclers from the Middle Ages complain about roads constantly, which may be the one thing medieval Europeans and modern commuters would passionately agree upon. A blacksmith travelling with your group crouches beside the broken wagon wheel, muttering insults at both the weather and humanity itself. Repairing a wheel on the road can take hours. Finding replacement wood may take days. Meanwhile, everybody waits impatiently while rain trickles down their noses. Nobody enjoys this. Well, almost nobody. A barefoot monk stands calmly in the drizzle, smiling faintly, apparently treating the entire miserable morning as some kind of spiritual growth exercise. Medieval religious travellers sometimes intentionally embrace hardship. Suffering, after all, supposedly brings you closer to holiness. You personally suspect holiness should involve fewer puddles. The road stretches ahead through rolling countryside patched with farmland. Thin smoke rises from distant cottages while crows stalk muddy fields searching for worms. Somewhere beyond the hills lies your next destination, assuming you do not drown in dirt first. You start walking. Every step requires effort. Mud clings heavily to your boots. Carts ahead leave deep ruts filled with brown water. Horses strain against wagons while drivers shout encouragement, mixed with creative profanity. Rainwater slides beneath your collar in icy little streams, and this is a relatively normal travel day. Historians still argue whether medieval roads were truly as catastrophic as later writers claimed, or whether travellers exaggerated conditions for dramatic effect. But surviving records make one thing clear: journeys are slow, very slow. On foot, you average perhaps 15 to 20 miles a day under decent conditions. Wagons often move even slower. A modern bicycle would basically make you a supernatural being. Near midday, disaster strikes again. One of the wagon horses slips. Its front legs skid sideways in thick mud, and suddenly the entire animal crashes down with terrifying force. The wagon tilts violently. Crates tumble into the road. Somebody screams. The horse thrashes frantically, eyes rolling white with panic. Everybody rushes forward. Medieval travel animals are valuable beyond measure. Horses cost fortunes. Oxen mean survival. Losing one during a journey can ruin an entire expedition. Several men grab harness straps while others try calming the terrified creature. Mud sprays everywhere. Rain pours harder. Eventually, after enormous effort and several near kicks to the head, the horse struggles upright again, trembling but alive. The wagon driver kisses the animal directly on the nose. Honestly, fair reaction. You continue forward through forests of dripping pine. The road narrows dangerously between thick trees. Branches creak overhead in the wind, while puddles reflect the grey sky like pools of melted iron. Travellers instinctively bunch closer together here. Open countryside feels safer somehow. Forests swallow sound, and forests hide people. A mounted rider suddenly appears ahead through mist, galloping hard toward your group. Everybody stiffens instantly. Hands move toward knives. The rider slows only slightly before splashing past, cloak whipping behind him. A messenger. Probably. Possibly. Nobody asks questions. Medieval roads carry news slowly but constantly. Royal orders, battle reports, trade agreements, plague rumours. Everything moves person by person across dangerous landscapes. Travellers become living information networks. Inns buzz nightly with gossip from distant regions. One merchant swears he heard of giant fish attacking ships near Norway. Another insists an Italian city recently banned pointed shoes because they became absurdly long. That second story is actually true. In parts of medieval Europe, fashionable shoes called poulaines develop ridiculously extended pointed toes. Sometimes so long they require chains attaching them to the knees. Critics complain they are sinful, impractical, and probably invented by Satan himself. Meanwhile, you can barely keep ordinary boots attached to your feet in the mud. By afternoon, the rain intensifies into a full storm. Thunder rolls across hills, water streams down the road in muddy currents. Cloaks cling heavily to shivering bodies. One elderly traveller quietly begins crying from exhaustion, which feels understandable considering conditions resemble the world's saddest hiking trip. You pass a wayside shrine beside the road, a tiny wooden figure of a saint sheltered beneath a crooked roof. Travellers pause briefly to pray for protection. Coins, ribbons, and scraps of cloth hang nearby as offerings. Medieval people often believe specific saints guard against dangers like storms, robbery, illness, or drowning. You silently request protection from literally everything. The storm worsens. Lightning flashes across black clouds while trees bend violently in the wind. The road ahead disappears beneath deep, standing water. A cart becomes stuck entirely, wheels buried nearly to the axle. 6 people push while the driver whips the horses uselessly. Mud splashes across faces. Boots vanish knee-deep. This takes almost an hour. Nobody speaks much afterward because everybody's too tired. Dusk approaches early beneath thick clouds. You ache everywhere now. Shoulders, knees, feet, lower back. Medieval travel destroys the body gradually. There are no cushioned shoes, no waterproof jackets, no energy drinks waiting at gas stations. Just cold rain and stubborn momentum. Finally, near sunset, you spot another cluster of buildings beside the road. A village. Tiny. Muddy. Smoke drifting from low roofs. Children stare openly as travellers enter. Chickens scatter beneath wagon wheels. The local inn looks marginally sturdier than a collapsing shed, which currently qualifies as luxury accommodation. Inside, heat from the fire hits your face like heaven itself. You remove soaked boots beside crackling flames while steam rises from damp clothes. Someone hands you thick stew containing turnips, barley, and possibly an animal historians would struggle to identify confidently. It tastes incredible anyway. Across the room, an old man quietly tells stories about a nearby road, supposedly haunted by travellers who vanished during winter storms decades earlier. A woman beside him insists ghostly lantern lights still appear there at night. Historians still argue whether such tales reflected genuine supernatural belief or simply served as warnings about dangerous routes. Either way, nobody volunteers to test the theory tonight. Outside, rain drums steadily against the shutters, while darkness settles over the village. The roads dissolve into black mud beyond the firelight. Tomorrow, you will step back onto them again because medieval journeys never really become easier. You just become wetter. The forest begins where the last farm ends. One moment you're passing muddy fields dotted with exhausted sheep, and the next, the trees close around the road like a trap snapping shut. Thick trunks crowd together beneath dripping branches while shadows pool between roots and bushes. Even during daylight, the forest feels dim and strangely airless, as though sunlight itself hesitates to enter. Everybody walks quieter here. Not officially. Nobody announces, "Attention everyone, we are now entering the terrifying murder woods." But conversations fade naturally. Wagon wheels creak softer. Boots squelch carefully through wet leaves and mud. Somewhere overhead, ravens croak from hidden branches like deeply judgmental spectators. You pull your cloak tighter and stay close to the group. Forests in medieval Europe inspire genuine fear. Not fairy tale fear with charming singing animals and attractive witches living in tasteful cottages. Real fear. Forests hide wolves, wild boars, fugitives, deserters, smugglers, and men who have decided robbery sounds easier than farming. Which, to be fair, farming also looks terrible. A merchant beside you quietly counts his money pouch for the third time this morning. Another traveller keeps glancing behind the group every few minutes. Even the horses seem nervous, ears twitching constantly at distant sounds. The road narrows between enormous oaks whose roots bulge across the mud like giant veins. Moss clings to bark. Fog curls low among bushes. Somewhere deeper in the trees comes the crack of a snapped branch. Everybody freezes immediately. Nothing happens. Probably a deer? Possibly not. You continue walking. Banditry becomes a major problem throughout many parts of medieval Europe, especially during periods of war or famine. Demobilized soldiers often drift into robbery after conflicts end. Some nobles even secretly protect criminals operating within their territories, taking a cut of stolen goods, while publicly condemning lawlessness with great theatrical sincerity. Historians still argue how common violent highway robbery truly was compared to exaggerated literary accounts. But surviving court records make one thing painfully clear. Travellers absolutely do get attacked, and forests are ideal places for it. Ahead, the road bends sharply around a rocky hill. Dense bushes crowd both sides. One wagon driver mutters that he dislikes blind corners. You immediately dislike them too, then you see movement. 3 figures step onto the road ahead wearing patched cloaks and carrying clubs. Another appears behind your group. A 5th man emerges from the trees holding a rusty spear. Well, that escalated quickly. Nobody moves at first. Rain drips softly from branches. The travellers exchange tense glances while the strangers stare back, with the calm confidence of people who outnumber you and know it. The leader grins. Unfortunately, he's missing several teeth, which somehow makes the grin far worse. "Road toll," he announces. "Ah yes, the classic medieval tradition of inventing taxes at spear point. The merchant beside you mutters something deeply unholy beneath his breath. One pilgrim begins praying quietly. A young boy travelling with a mule cart looks moments away from fainting completely. The robbers advance slowly. Then something unexpected happens. A nun steps forward. Tiny woman, elderly, looks approximately 90 years old and powered entirely by disappointment. She points directly at the bandit leader and starts scolding him with astonishing intensity. Not yelling, exactly. Worse. That sharp, relentless lecture tone perfected by elderly women across all centuries. She demands to know whether his mother would approve of this behaviour. She questions his spiritual condition. She informs him that stealing from pilgrims guarantees divine judgment. The entire forest falls silent. Even the robbers appear confused. For a long moment, nobody moves. Then, incredibly, the bandit leader sighs like a child caught cheating at chores. He waves his men aside irritably and tells the travellers to leave. Just like that, you hurry past before anybody changes their mind. As the group moves deeper into the woods, nervous laughter spreads among the travellers. The merchants praise the nun like she personally defeated an army. She merely sniffs and says, "Young men lack discipline nowadays." Honestly, she may be the most terrifying person in the forest. The road worsens steadily through the afternoon. Thick roots trip your boots constantly. Low branches slap wet leaves across your face. Gnats swarm in damp air. Somewhere nearby comes the sound of the running water, though you never actually see the stream itself. A strange smell drifts through the trees suddenly, sharp and rotten. Dead animal. Probably. Medieval forests contain all kinds of unpleasant surprises. Wolves roam many regions of Europe during the Middle Ages, especially harsh winters when food grows scarce. Wild boars are even worse in some ways. Aggressive, massive, and equipped with tusks apparently designed by demons. A hunter travelling with the group points out claw marks gouged into one tree trunk. "Bear," he whispers casually. "Wonderful." You walk faster. To stay alert, travellers often tell stories on dangerous roads. Some are funny, most are horrifying. One man claims his cousin vanished in these woods years earlier after following mysterious lantern lights at night. Another swears monks discovered tiny hairy people living underground near the Rhine. That second story may actually connect to medieval folklore about kobolds, mischievous household and mine spirits blamed for theft, accidents, and strange noises. Medieval Europeans inhabit a world crowded with supernatural possibilities. Saints intervene in battles, demons lurk in storms, fairies dance in forests, and honestly, after 3 days walking through cold mud, you start becoming surprisingly open-minded about cursed woods. Near sunset, the group reaches a narrow clearing where several charcoal burners work beside smoking piles of wood. Their faces appear blackened with soot. Thin children stare silently from crude huts nearby. Charcoal production becomes vital in medieval industry, supplying fuel for blacksmiths, metal workers, and glassmakers. Entire families sometimes live deep in forests, tending slow-burning charcoal mounds for months at a time. Travellers often find such woodland communities unsettling because they seem half-separated from ordinary society. One charcoal burner warns your group not to camp farther north tonight. "Bad men," he says simply. That description covers approximately half the continent. Still, nobody ignores the warning. You stop early in a small clearing surrounded by thick pine. Wagons form a rough defensive circle, while travellers gather fallen branches for fires. Horses are tied close together. Someone hangs tiny bells nearby so movement during the night might wake the camp. Smart idea. Darkness settles quickly beneath the trees. Firelight flickers across nervous faces while stew bubbles weakly in an iron pot. Rain finally stops, leaving only dripping branches and distant owl calls echoing through the forest. Nobody strays far from campfires. A merchant quietly checks his dagger before sleeping. The pilgrim clutches his saint relic beneath blankets. The old nun snores peacefully like somebody entirely confident God will personally handle any nighttime emergencies. You lie awake staring upward through branches swaying against the stars. Then you hear it. Footsteps. Faint. Somewhere beyond the firelight. Crunching leaves. Slow movement between trees. Several others hear it too. Bodies tense immediately. One guard grips a spear while peering into darkness. The sound stops. Silence stretches. Then, from far away, comes a wolf howl rolling through the forest night. Another answers, and another. The horses shift nervously beside the wagons, while travellers pull blankets tighter around themselves. Nobody sleeps deeply after that. Medieval forests have a way of reminding you that humans are not nearly as important as they like pretending, especially after dark. Morning begins with fleas. Not one flea, unfortunately. Hundreds. Possibly thousands. Tiny enthusiastic parasites that spent the entire night treating your blanket like a luxury vacation property. You wake scratching violently while the merchant beside you mutters threats against all creation. The forest camp smells terrible in daylight. Cold ashes, damp wool, horse sweat, wet leather, and yesterday's stew lingering in the air like a curse. One traveller discovers something suspicious growing on his boot. Another complains that mice stole part of his bread during the night. The old nun calmly eats breakfast as though sleeping beside wolves, and potential murderers is perfectly ordinary. Honestly, for her, it probably is. The road finally leaves the forest by midday, opening onto rolling farmland patched with villages and grazing sheep. Sunlight breaks weakly through clouds for the first time in days. Everybody relaxes slightly. Open land feels safer. You can actually see danger approaching instead of hearing it breathe somewhere behind trees. And more importantly, civilization means inns. By late afternoon, the road grows busier. Merchants drive carts loaded with wool and salted fish. Pilgrims shuffle onward beneath dusty cloaks. A nobleman gallops past with armed retainers who stare at common travellers like people inspecting vegetables they do not intend to purchase. Nobody appreciates them. You pass roadside gallows standing beside a crossroads, weathered wooden beams creaking softly in the wind. A skeleton still dangles there, rattling gently. Medieval authorities love leaving executed criminals displayed publicly. It serves as a warning to thieves, rebels, and apparently anyone hoping to enjoy a peaceful walk through the countryside. Crows perch comfortably on the skull. One traveller quietly crosses himself. Another mutters that the dead man probably stole bread. Historians still argue whether medieval punishments were genuinely harsher than those of later centuries, or simply more public and theatrical. Either way, dangling skeletons do very little for road trip morale. Thankfully, the inn appears shortly afterward. At least, inn is technically the word people use. The building leans sideways beside the road with all the confidence of a drunk uncle attempting to dance at weddings. Smoke seeps through gaps in the roof. Chickens wander freely through the doorway. A faded wooden sign creaks overhead depicting what might once have been a horse, but now resembles an exhausted potato. Still, travellers hurry toward it like survivors reaching land after a shipwreck. Inside, warmth slams into you immediately. So does the smell. Wood smoke, ale, sweat, wet dogs, onions frying in old grease, unwashed bodies packed close together. Medieval inns rarely separate travellers into private rooms unless you are wealthy enough to casually own 3 horses and possibly a castle. Most people sleep communally in crowded halls beside strangers whose nighttime breathing sounds medically concerning. You squeeze onto a bench near the fire while the innkeeper stomps over carrying mugs of ale. The ale is weak, cloudy, and tastes vaguely like sour bread left inside a boot. You drink it gratefully anyway. Water in medieval towns can be dangerous due to contamination. So many people rely heavily on weak ale or beer instead. Even children drink diluted versions. Medieval Europeans are not constantly drunk exactly, but they are definitely operating on what modern office policies would consider questionable hydration practices. A toothless man across the room claims this inn serves the finest rabbit stew in the region. Nobody asks too many questions about the meat. Near the hearth, musicians pluck softly at a lute, while travellers trade stories from distant roads. Inns function as information centres throughout medieval Europe. News travels person to person, mug to mug. Tonight the room buzzes with rumours. A bridge collapsed north of here. Bandits robbed a bishop's messenger. A merchant caravan vanished in the mountains. A woman near the fire insists she once saw ghost monks marching along a roadside at midnight carrying lanterns without flames. The old nun merely snorts into her ale. You finally receive a bowl of stew thick enough to repair damaged walls. It contains cabbage, barley, carrots, and chunks of meat with deeply mysterious origins. After days on muddy roads, it tastes miraculous, until somebody nearby starts vomiting, loudly. The room falls silent for one uncomfortable moment before everyone collectively decides ignoring it is easier. Food poisoning is extremely common during medieval travel. Inns vary wildly in quality. Some provide decent shelter and reliable meals. Others basically sell warm disease with a side of stale bread. Travellers cannot afford to be picky. A skinny servant girl spreads fresh straw across the sleeping floor upstairs. Fresh here means slightly less damp than the previous straw. You climb creaking stairs alongside merchants, pilgrims, and one snoring man who appears asleep while still standing. The sleeping room resembles a battlefield after surrender negotiations failed. Bodies everywhere. People share beds freely because space is limited, and heating costs matter. Complete strangers often sleep pressed shoulder to shoulder beneath rough blankets. Snoring erupts from every direction. Someone nearby mutters in dreams. Another traveller smells so aggressively of garlic that you briefly consider sleeping outside with the wolves instead. Then the bedbugs arrive. Medieval inns become infamous for infestations. Fleas, lice, mites, bedbugs. Entire microscopic civilizations thrive within straw mattresses and wooden walls. Travellers sometimes carry special combs specifically for removing lice from hair and clothing. One medieval scholar even complains that inns contain more insects than stars in heaven, which honestly feels emotionally accurate. You settle onto scratchy blankets anyway because exhaustion eventually defeats dignity. Below, the common room grows louder as the evening deepens. Tankards slam against tables. Somebody starts singing terribly. Two merchants argue over wool prices with the intensity of rival warlords. Laughter erupts near the fire. Then comes the sound of fighting. You sit upright immediately. Shouting echoes from downstairs, followed by a crash of breaking pottery. Several travellers stumble toward the stairwell for a better view, because humans remain committed to watching chaos throughout all historical periods. In the common room, two drunk men wrestle beside overturned benches while the innkeeper beats both with a ladle. Apparently the argument involves cheating at dice. Gambling flourishes in medieval inns despite frequent religious condemnation. Dice games become wildly popular among travellers, soldiers, and merchants. Some people even use loaded dice carved unevenly to guarantee victory. The innkeeper finally throws both fighters into the mud outside. Everyone applauds. Peace returns gradually afterward. Firelight flickers lower. Travellers drift towards sleep one by one. Rain taps softly against shutters again while wind moans around the crooked building. Beside you, the pilgrim quietly whispers prayers before sleeping. Across the room, a merchant ties his money pouch directly around his neck so nobody steals it overnight. Smart decision. The old nun notices your concern and casually mentions that thieves sometimes cut purses directly from sleeping travellers. Wonderful. You tighten your own grip on belongings and stare upward into darkness where smoke curls along ceiling beams. Outside, somewhere beyond the warm glow of the inn, muddy roads stretch endlessly across medieval Europe. Forests wait patiently. Rivers flood silently. Wolves wander beneath moonlight. But tonight at least you are indoors, covered in fleas, mildly poisoned, and sharing a mattress with a man who snores like collapsing architecture. Still counts as luxury. The bridge does not inspire confidence. You see it long before reaching the river, a narrow wooden structure sagging across grey, rushing water, like something assembled during a collective panic. Half the planks appear warped. The rope rails droop sadly. One support beam leans at an angle that feels spiritually incorrect, and unfortunately this bridge guards the only crossing for miles. The river itself churns violently beneath morning fog, swollen from days of rain. Brown water crashes against rocks while tree branches spin through the current like tossed spears. You stop automatically beside the other travellers, everybody silently studying the bridge with the same expression people use before eating suspicious seafood. Nobody wants to go first. Rivers become some of the deadliest obstacles in medieval travel. Roads are terrible, forests are dangerous, and inns are basically flea-themed gambling dens. But rivers actively try to kill you. Bridges collapse, ferries capsize, strong currents sweep away horses, wagons, entire families, and medieval Europeans are painfully aware of this. A merchant near you mutters that the bridge looked sturdier last spring. That is not encouraging information. At the riverbank, a ferryman watches travellers impatiently from beneath a hooded cloak. His boat sits tied near shore, bumping against wet posts. The vessel looks approximately one wave away from becoming firewood. Still, several travellers already argue about whether paying for the ferry is safer than trusting the bridge. This is the kind of decision medieval journeys constantly force upon you. Which dangerous option seems slightly less terrible today? The ferryman announces his prices with the smug confidence of a man who understands desperation perfectly. Crossing rivers becomes profitable business during the Middle Ages. Lords often control bridges and ferries, collecting tolls from merchants and pilgrims alike. Some crossings become infamous money traps, where travellers pay enormous fees simply because there is no alternative. One wagon driver loudly accuses the ferryman of robbery. The ferryman calmly points toward the river and suggests swimming instead. Fair enough. Eventually your group chooses the bridge. You immediately regret this choice halfway across. The wooden planks groan beneath boots and wagon wheels. Water roars below through gaps in the boards. Wind whips cold spray into your face while the entire structure sways alarmingly with every movement. Nobody speaks now. Even the horses seem nervous. Ahead, one merchant grips the rope rail so tightly, his knuckles turn pale beneath dirt. Behind you, a wagon wheel hits a rotten plank with a loud crack. Several travellers gasp simultaneously. The plank holds. Barely. You keep moving very carefully while trying not to imagine falling into the river below. Medieval people generally do not swim well by modern standards. In many regions, swimming is surprisingly uncommon, especially among ordinary labourers. Heavy clothing and armour make accidents even deadlier. Historians still argue exactly how widespread swimming skills were across medieval Europe, but surviving accounts suggest many travellers genuinely feared deep water. Watching this river, you completely understand why. Halfway across, disaster strikes. A mule panics. Maybe the wind startles it. Maybe the creaking bridge finally overwhelms its tiny mule brain. Either way, the animal suddenly jerks sideways, smashing against a cart loaded with barrels. The cart tilts violently. One barrel tumbles over the edge. Everyone watches helplessly as it crashes into the river below and vanishes instantly downstream. The mule screams, which, if you have never heard a terrified mule before, sounds disturbingly similar to a demon discovering taxes. Travellers shout. The driver pulls desperately at the reins. The bridge sways harder beneath shifting weight. For one horrible moment, it genuinely feels like the entire structure might collapse into the torrent. Then somehow the mule steadies. The cart settles again. Nobody breathes for several seconds afterward. You finally reach the opposite bank, shaking slightly with relief. Several travellers immediately kneel to kiss solid ground, which feels dramatic but understandable. The old nun simply marches onward without slowing, apparently immune to fear, weather, and possibly death itself. Beyond the river, the landscape changes gradually. Marshy fields stretch toward distant hills, while reeds sway beside flooded ditches. Frogs croak loudly from standing water. The road here rises unevenly above wetlands, little more than a muddy causeway lined with rotting posts. A local farmer warns your group not to wander off the path. People disappear into bogs sometimes. Wonderful again. Medieval Europe contains vast wetlands and marshes that travellers often dread crossing. Wagons become trapped easily. Mosquitoes swarm in enormous clouds. Thick fog turns familiar routes confusing. Some bogs even preserve ancient bodies naturally within peat, leading medieval people to occasionally discover eerily intact corpses emerging from the mud. Imagine taking a pleasant walk and suddenly finding a perfectly preserved dead man staring at you from a swamp. No thank you. Near midday, you encounter another crossing problem. This time it is not a river. It is a toll gate. A squat stone tower blocks the road, while armed guards lounge nearby looking deeply bored. A chain stretches across the path. Above it hangs the banner of some local noble, whose name nobody outside this region probably remembers. One guard demands payment immediately. Travel throughout medieval Europe involves endless tolls. Bridges, roads, city gates, mountain passes. Everybody wants money from travellers. Merchants complain constantly about overlapping taxes draining profits. Some routes become notorious for corruption, where guards invent extra fees purely because they can. Today appears to be one of those days. The guards inspect wagons suspiciously, while debating whether certain goods require additional payment. A merchant argues loudly for nearly 20 minutes over salt taxes. Meanwhile, rain begins again, because apparently the sky has personal issues with your journey. A young guard notices the pilgrim shells worn by several travellers, and suddenly grows much friendlier. Pilgrims sometimes receive special protections or reduced tolls due to religious respect. Of course, plenty of criminals also disguise themselves as pilgrims for exactly this reason. Medieval roads reward creativity. Eventually your group passes through, after surrendering a painful amount of coins. The merchants grumble furiously afterward while calculating losses. By evening, dark clouds gather heavily overhead. Thunder mutters across distant hills. The road narrows beside another river, smaller this time but fast-moving and unpleasantly deep near the banks. There is no bridge, only a ford marked by wooden stakes. Water crossings without bridges become common in rural regions. Travellers wade directly through shallow sections while praying the current behaves politely. During storms, these crossings become extremely dangerous. Naturally, the storm arrives exactly as your group reaches the ford. Rain crashes down suddenly in thick silver sheets. The river churns harder almost immediately. Horses snort nervously, while travellers debate whether to wait or risk crossing before water rises further. Lightning flashes overhead. Nobody wants to camp beside a flooding river overnight. So into the water you go. The current slams against your legs instantly, icy and stronger than expected. Mud sucks at your boots beneath cloudy water. Wagons creak uncertainly while horses strain forward. Rain blinds you. Somebody loses grip on a sack which spins away downstream. Then one traveller slips. A young man disappears sideways into the current with a terrified shout. Water drags him several feet instantly before two others grab his arms and haul him upright again, sputtering and pale. The crossing suddenly becomes very quiet after that. You reach the far bank, soaked completely through and shaking from cold. Behind you, the river roars louder beneath darkening skies. Another crossing survived. Barely. As night settles over the countryside, lantern lights finally appear ahead through rain and fog. Shelter again. Another inn. Another crowded room full of damp strangers pretending they are not frightened of tomorrow's roads. Because medieval travel teaches one lesson faster than any other. Every safe arrival feels temporary. The road to the shrine begins smelling terrible several miles before you ever see it. Not one terrible smell either. Multiple layers. Sweat. Wet wool. Horses. Wood smoke. Mud. Unwashed bodies packed too closely together for too many days. And beneath it all drifts the unmistakable scent of medieval medicine, which mostly consists of herbs, vinegar, and desperate optimism. You have joined a pilgrimage route now, which means the roads suddenly become crowded beyond reason. Travellers spill across muddy hillsides in long, uneven lines. Peasants clutching walking sticks, merchants selling holy badges, monks leading donkeys, noblewomen riding beneath embroidered cloaks, barefoot penitents muttering prayers with alarming intensity. Somewhere ahead lies a famous shrine rumoured to contain the relics of a saint capable of healing illness, forgiving sins, or perhaps improving your luck depending on which storyteller you believe. And medieval people believe very enthusiastically. Pilgrimages become one of the biggest travel movements in Europe during the Middle Ages. Thousands journey toward holy destinations like Canterbury Cathedral, Santiago de Compostela Cathedral, and St. Peter's Basilica. Some seek miracles. Others perform penance for crimes. Some simply crave adventure, which is unfortunate because medieval adventure mostly involves blisters and diarrhea. The crowd inches slowly along the road while rain threatens again overhead. Pilgrims sing hymns to keep rhythm while walking. A man beside you carries a tiny cage holding 2 chickens for reasons nobody explains. Children cry. Someone coughs constantly. A donkey bites a monk. Honestly, the donkey may have valid reasons. Vendors line sections of the route selling bread, relics, charms, and holy souvenirs. Medieval pilgrimage quickly becomes serious business. Entire towns profit from religious tourism centuries before souvenir snow globes, and overpriced airport sandwiches. One merchant proudly offers tiny lead badges stamped with saint images. Another sells fragments of holy bone that suspiciously resemble ordinary chicken remains. A woman nearby claims to possess a feather from the Archangel Gabriel. Historians still argue how many medieval relics were deliberate frauds versus sincere misunderstandings fueled by intense faith. Either way, Europe somehow accumulates enough authentic saint bones to assemble several extra humans. The old nun travelling with your group eyes the feather seller with open disgust. Probably wise. The road narrows through a village overflowing with temporary tents and stalls. Fires crackle beside muddy lanes, while pilgrims crowd shoulder to shoulder around cooking pots. Every available barn, stable and shed has been converted into lodging. Noise fills the air constantly. Prayers, arguments, singing, coughing, bells, snoring animals. You have never missed personal space more in your life. A priest standing beside the road loudly warns travellers against thieves disguised as pilgrims. This warning feels approximately as useful as announcing that rivers are wet. Crowded pilgrimage routes attract pickpockets the way bread attracts ducks. Sure enough, chaos erupts ahead moments later. A woman screams. People turn instantly as a young thief darts through the crowd clutching a stolen purse. Pilgrims stumble aside. Chickens explode into panicked flapping. A merchant attempts heroically to trip the boy but instead falls directly into mud himself. The thief vanishes between tents. Gone. The crowd resumes moving almost immediately because medieval Europe has developed impressive emotional resilience toward everyday crime. Near sunset, the shrine finally appears atop a low hill. Candles flicker through stained glass windows while bells ring softly across the valley. Hundreds of pilgrims climb muddy steps toward the church entrance carrying offerings. Coins, candles, carved figures, scraps of cloth. Some weep openly upon arrival. Inside, incense thickens the air heavily enough to taste. The church glows gold beneath candlelight. Murals cover stone walls. Priests chant prayers while exhausted pilgrims kneel across the floor. Near the altar stands the shrine itself, surrounded by flickering candles and nervous guards watching for thieves. Everyone wants a closer look. You shuffle forward slowly among the crowd until finally reaching the relic chamber. Inside rests an ornate golden box supposedly containing bones from a dead for centuries. People react differently. Some pray silently, some cry. One man touches the shrine and immediately claims his back pain disappeared. A skeptical merchant whispers that the man looked perfectly healthy beforehand. Medieval religion blends deep devotion with constant skepticism in fascinating ways. Many people genuinely believe miracles occur regularly. Others quietly suspect exaggeration. Still others simply hope belief might work even if certainty does not. You notice travellers leaving strange offerings near the shrine. Crutches from healed pilgrims, tiny wax body parts representing injuries, silver charms shaped like eyes or hands. A mother presses her sick child toward the reliquary while whispering desperate prayers. The atmosphere feels overwhelming somehow. Hope, fear, exhaustion, faith, all packed tightly together beneath candle smoke. Then someone faints. Actually, several people faint. The room grows hot from overcrowding. Guards push crowds backward while priests continue chanting with professional calm. Somewhere behind you, a man begins loudly insisting he witnessed divine light descending from the ceiling. Nobody else saw it. Probably. Outside the church, darkness settles over a sprawling sea of tents and campfires. Pilgrims fill every inch of nearby ground. Storytellers entertain crowds beside fires while traders continue selling food and relics long into the evening. You finally manage to buy supper from a woman stirring stew in an iron cauldron. She claims the recipe came from her grandmother. Judging by the taste, her grandmother may have hated seasoning personally. Still edible, though. Around one fire, travellers exchange stories about famous pilgrimage miracles. A French pilgrim swears he saw a blind man regain sight after visiting a shrine in Italy. Another claims wolves once guided lost travellers safely through snowstorms toward a monastery. The blacksmith travelling beside you quietly mutters that monks invent half these stories to attract donations. The old nun overhears immediately and threatens to hit him with a spoon. Peace negotiations follow shortly afterward. As the night deepens, musicians begin playing soft hymns beneath the stars. Hundreds of tiny fires flicker across the hillsides while tired pilgrims settle into blankets. Somewhere nearby comes the sound of quiet sobbing. Somewhere else, drunken laughter erupts beside an ale tent because medieval spirituality contains surprising range. You lie awake staring upward. Tomorrow many pilgrims will continue onward to new shrines, new roads, new dangers. Some journeys last months or years. A few travellers walk all the way to Jerusalem despite wars, storms, disease and pirates making this an objectively terrible idea. And yet people keep going. Because pilgrimage offers something rare in medieval life. Movement, purpose. Hope that somewhere beyond the next hill waits healing, forgiveness, or at least a story worth telling. A bell tolls softly through the darkness. Around you, exhausted travellers sleep beneath wagons, tents, cloaks, and open skies. The air smells of smoke and rain and damp earth, and for one quiet moment, the dangerous roads of Europe feel less lonely than before. You notice the scratching first. Not your scratching. Everybody's. Pilgrims rub at their sleeves. Merchants scratch their beards. A boy beside the road digs furiously at his scalp with the concentration of a scholar solving mathematics. At first you ignore it because medieval travel contains so many unpleasant sensations that one more barely registers. Then you feel something crawling beneath your collar. Ah, wonderful. Disease travels the roads as faithfully as any merchant caravan. Wherever crowds gather, inns, pilgrimage camps, marketplaces, ships, sickness follows closely behind carrying invisible little disasters. Medieval Europe does not fully understand germs, bacteria or viruses, which means people explain illness through religion, bad air, astrology, divine punishment, or unfortunate planetary alignment. And honestly, considering the average hygiene situation, bad air probably feels convincing. Morning mist hangs low across the pilgrimage camp while travellers slowly pack belongings. Fires smoulder. Horses stamp impatiently. Somewhere nearby, someone coughs so hard it sounds medically ambitious. The old nun notices you scratching and immediately inspects your collar with terrifying efficiency. Lice, she announces. Of course, lice infestations become incredibly common during medieval travel. Crowded sleeping conditions, limited bathing, and constant shared bedding create paradise for parasites. Travellers often carry fine-toothed combs, specifically designed for removing lice eggs from hair and clothing. The nun hands you one without sympathy. Nearby, a merchant heats a seam of his tunic over a candle flame to kill insects hiding in the fabric. Another traveller claims garlic prevents lice entirely. Someone else insists rubbing onion juice behind the ears works better. Historians still argue how effective medieval hygiene practices truly were compared to modern stereotypes. People absolutely do bathe when possible. Public bathhouses exist in many towns. Soap is known and used. But constant travel makes cleanliness difficult, especially when roads mostly consist of mud and suffering. You spend part of the morning picking tiny bugs from your clothing, beside several equally miserable pilgrims. Not exactly the glorious spiritual journey promised in religious paintings. The road leaves the shrine behind and stretches through damp farmland beneath pale skies. Crowds thin gradually as pilgrims split toward different destinations. Some head north toward ports. Others travel south toward monasteries or market towns. Your smaller group continues westward alongside a narrow river lined with willow trees. The coughing man still coughs, louder now. He rides in the back of a wagon wrapped in blankets despite the mild weather. His wife dabs vinegar beneath his nose while whispering prayers. A passing monk recommends powdered herbs mixed with wine. Another traveller suggests hanging a dried toad around the neck to absorb illness. You sincerely hope that one is not medically endorsed. Medieval medicine combines genuine practical knowledge with ideas that sound completely unhinged today. Herbal remedies sometimes work surprisingly well. Surgery exists in basic forms. Physicians study ancient texts seriously. But many treatments also involve balancing humours inside the body through bloodletting, purging, or applying substances that should never touch human skin under any circumstances. A barber surgeon travelling nearby proudly displays leeches stored in a jar. That feels like information he should keep private. By afternoon, rain returns because the sky remains committed to your emotional destruction. Travellers pull cloaks tight while muddy roads soften again beneath wagon wheels. The coughing man grows visibly worse. His breathing rattles now. People begin giving his wagon slightly more space. Fear of disease shapes medieval travel constantly. Outbreaks spread rapidly along trade routes and pilgrimage roads. Inns become infection hubs. Ships carry sickness between ports. Entire towns sometimes bar strangers from entering during epidemics. And everyone remembers plague stories. Even generations later, memories of the Black Death linger across Europe like a nightmare that never fully fades. The Black Death kills staggering numbers of people during the 14th century, perhaps a third or more of Europe's population according to many estimates. Chroniclers describe abandoned villages, overflowing graveyards, and carts piled with bodies. Some medieval people believe the plague spreads through poisoned air. Others blame foreign travellers, sinners, cats, planets, or minority communities. Panic creates its own disasters. A merchant quietly mutters that the coughing man should be left behind before he infects everyone. Nobody answers immediately. The wife hears him. Her face hardens instantly with exhausted fury. She announces that her husband survived war, famine, and 3 winters in the Alps. He is not being abandoned beside a muddy road like broken luggage. The old nun supports her immediately. Honestly, nobody argues with the nun anymore. She has achieved the social authority of an angry saint. The group keeps moving together. Toward evening, you reach a market town surrounded by low stone walls. Guards inspect incoming travellers carefully at the gate. One official carries a bundle of herbs pressed against his face, supposedly protecting him from sickness through pleasant smells. This becomes a surprisingly common medieval strategy. Doctors and officials often carry flowers, spices, or vinegar-soaked cloth, believing strong scents block disease. During later plague outbreaks, physicians wear famous beaked masks stuffed with aromatic herbs. The masks look less reassuring and more like giant murderous birds. Inside the town, narrow streets overflow with noise and smell. Fishmongers shout beside open drains. Blacksmith hammers ring through smoky air. Crowds push between market stalls while pigs wander freely through mud. And everywhere, people. Too many people. Travellers squeeze into another inn already packed with merchants escaping the rain. Heat and body odour strike like a physical force when the door opens. The coughing man is carried upstairs while his wife begs for hot water. Several guests immediately request rooms farther away. A physician eventually arrives wearing expensive robes and an expression of absolute confidence unsupported by science. He checks the sick man's pulse dramatically, examines urine in a glass flask against candlelight, and recommends bloodletting. Of course he does. Historians still debate how much medieval physicians truly helped patients versus accidentally accelerating death through harmful treatments. Some doctors possess real skill and observational knowledge. Others basically freestyle medicine using astrology charts and vibes. The barber surgeon eagerly sharpens tools downstairs. You decide not to watch. As night deepens, rumours spread through the inn that sickness already infected several pilgrims on the road south. A merchant swears an entire village nearby died from fever last winter. Another insists travellers from distant ports carry strange diseases unseen before. Fear spreads faster than facts. You lie awake listening to rain tapping softly against shutters, while muffled coughing echoes upstairs through wooden beams. Around you, travellers shift uneasily beneath blankets. Someone quietly prays in the darkness. Outside, medieval roads continue threading across Europe like veins carrying trade, stories, faith, and disease. Because every traveller brings something with them. Sometimes goods, sometimes news, sometimes lice, and sometimes something far worse. The soldiers appear just after sunrise. At first you mistake them for ordinary travellers moving through morning fog along the road ahead. Then the mist thins slightly, revealing helmets, spear points, patched cloaks, and the unmistakable swagger of armed men who have spent far too much time solving problems with violence. Everybody in your group slows immediately. The soldiers notice. That is not ideal. There are 6 of them, though soldiers may be generous. Their armour mismatches badly. One wears chainmail missing half its rings, another carries a shield cracked down the centre, and a third appears to have tied kitchen utensils onto his belt, for reasons known only to himself. Their horses look exhausted. So do they, mercenaries or deserters. Possibly both. Medieval Europe contains endless wandering armed men. Wars erupt constantly between kingdoms, nobles, cities, dukes, bishops, and occasionally people who simply wake up feeling argumentative. When conflicts end, thousands of trained fighters suddenly find themselves unemployed, hungry, and carrying weapons. This creates predictable problems for everybody else. The leader rides forward slowly, eyeing your wagons. You notice immediately that everyone nearby avoids sudden movements. Merchants glance nervously toward money pouches. Pilgrims grip staffs tighter. Even the old nun narrows her eyes like a disappointed schoolteacher preparing disciplinary action. The mercenary captain smiles. Unfortunately, unlike the bandit in the forest, this man still possesses all his teeth, which somehow makes him more threatening. "Road's dangerous lately," he says casually. "Ah, yes. Medieval small talk." He asks whether your group encountered bandits nearby. One merchant lies instantly and claims armed knights patrol the region heavily. Smart answer. The captain studies him for a long moment before laughing softly. "Then we'll feel safer too," he replies. Nobody enjoys this conversation. The mercenaries ride alongside your group for nearly an hour afterward. Their presence changes everything. Travellers speak less. The atmosphere tightens painfully. You become aware of every sword hilt, every axe handle, every horse shifting beside the road. One mercenary begins flirting loudly with a merchant's daughter. Another keeps staring at supply sacks. A third hums cheerfully while sharpening a knife against his boot. Wonderful company. Historians still argue whether medieval mercenaries truly deserve their terrifying reputations, or whether chroniclers exaggerated their brutality. But surviving records from conflicts like the 100 Years' War describe roaming bands of unemployed soldiers devastating countryside communities after truces. Peasants fear them intensely, and honestly, you do too. The road winds through vineyards and abandoned farms beneath grey skies. Several cottages stand empty beside the fields, roofs sagging inward. One well has collapsed entirely. The blacksmith mutters that war passed through here recently. You can tell. Medieval warfare often destroys civilian life more through movement than battles. Armies consume food, burn crops, steal livestock, and spread disease wherever they travel. Even victorious soldiers need feeding. Villagers sometimes flee entire regions simply to avoid passing troops. A scarecrow leans broken beside a ruined wheat field, while crows perch across its arms like tiny judges. One mercenary notices you staring. "Better than battlefields," he says casually. You're not sure whether that sentence comforts or horrifies you more. Near midday, the group reaches a roadside chapel half hidden among trees. Travellers stop gratefully for water and rest. The mercenaries dismount too, though several villagers watching from nearby fields immediately retreat indoors at the sight of armed strangers. The chapel priest emerges cautiously carrying bread and watered wine. His smile looks deeply nervous. Hospitality becomes complicated around soldiers. Inside the chapel hangs a faded mural showing saints protecting travellers from violence. One saint calmly deflects arrows with divine assistance, while another rescues drowning pilgrims from stormy seas. You quietly wish they specialised in protecting people from awkward mercenary encounters too. The captain notices the mural and laughs. "Saints never marched with real armies," he says. The old nun immediately replies that perhaps real armies should behave more like saints. Silence follows. One of the mercenaries coughs awkwardly into his fist. Honestly, watching armed veterans lose arguments to elderly nuns is becoming one of your favourite medieval traditions. The uneasy alliance continues through the afternoon because neither side wishes to travel alone. Roads remain dangerous enough that even frightening people fear other frightening people. Safety becomes relative very quickly in medieval Europe. Then the weather changes. Cold wind sweeps across the hills carrying the smell of snow despite it being only autumn. Dark clouds gather overhead while dead leaves scatter along the road. One mercenary quietly mentions mountain storms arriving early this year. Nobody likes hearing that. You stop before dusk at a fortified roadside manor, offering shelter for travellers willing to pay. Thick stone walls surround the compound while guards patrol above wooden gates. Finally, actual security. Probably. Inside the courtyard, merchants unload wagons beside stables crowded with horses. Smoke rises warmly from chimneys. For the first time in days, you feel almost safe. Almost. Because medieval fortifications attract armed men the way taverns attract gambling arguments. The mercenaries quickly find ale. Several other soldiers already occupy the hall inside, retainers escorting a minor noble northward. They eye the newcomers suspiciously across crowded tables. Nobody reaches for weapons yet, but the tension becomes noticeable immediately. You settle near the fire while servants carry bowls of thick lentil stew through the room. Compared to previous inns, this place feels luxurious. Dry straw, strong walls, actual candles instead of smoky rushlights. Then someone insults someone else's horse. This escalates with breathtaking speed. Within moments, two soldiers are shouting across tables, while companions drag benches backward to create fighting space. One mercenary rises slowly, hand resting on his sword. The nobles' retainers stand too. The innkeeper looks exhausted beyond human language. Apparently medieval men are capable of turning livestock criticism into near warfare in under 30 seconds. The old nun slams her spoon against the table loudly enough to stun the room. Again. Absolute silence follows. She announces that anybody spilling blood before supper finishes cleaning the latrines personally. Nobody moves. One retainer quietly sits back down. The mercenary captain stares at the nun for several seconds before bursting into helpless laughter. Slowly the tension breaks. Alay mugs rise again. Arguments shrink into muttering. Peace restored by weaponized grandmother energy. Later that night, storms hammer the manor walls while travellers crowd close beside fires. Rain lashes shutters. Wind moans through stone corridors. Somewhere outside, horses whinny nervously in darkness. You overhear mercenaries discussing past campaigns in low voices. Sieges, starvation, frozen marches through mountain passes. One man describes soldiers boiling leather straps for food during winter. Another mentions entire patrols vanishing in snowstorms without trace. The room grows quieter around such stories. Because roads already feel dangerous enough during peace, war simply teaches them new ways to kill you. The mountains appear gradually at first, just faint blue shapes along the horizon beyond rolling hills and vineyards. Easy to ignore, almost peaceful. Then each day the peaks grow larger, darker, sharper, until finally they dominate the entire world ahead, like enormous stone walls built by irritated giants. And unfortunately your road leads directly into them. Cold wind sweeps down from the heights carrying the smell of snow and pine. The air changes too. Thinner somehow. Cleaner, but sharper against your lungs. Travellers tighten cloaks while wagons creak uphill through narrow valleys lined with jagged cliffs. The mercenaries from earlier finally split away toward another route at dawn, leaving your group oddly relieved and strangely vulnerable at the same time. You had gotten used to their swords nearby. That realization feels concerning. Mountain travel in medieval Europe becomes especially dangerous during autumn and winter. Passes close unexpectedly beneath snow. Avalanches bury roads. Freezing temperatures kill travellers overnight. Even experienced guides sometimes vanish into storms without trace. Yet people keep crossing because trade demands it. Salt, wool, wine, spices, metals. Entire economies depend on dangerous mountain routes threading through ranges like the Alps and Pyrenees. Mule trains inch along cliffside paths carrying goods between kingdoms, while pilgrims and merchants pray constantly that weather behaves itself. Spoiler, it usually does not. The road narrows steadily as your group climbs higher. Sometimes road means little more than a muddy ledge carved beside terrifying drops into mist-filled ravines. One wrong step would send wagon, horse and driver tumbling hundreds of feet downward. You avoid looking over the edge. A mule driver ahead whistles softly to calm his animals. Tiny bells hanging from their harnesses chime faintly in cold air. Far below, rivers twist silver through valleys already hidden beneath drifting fog. Beautiful, also horrifying. Historians still argue how much medieval mountain crossings improved during the later Middle Ages as trade expanded and rulers invested in infrastructure. Some passes gain bridges, hospices and guide systems. Others remain basically death paths with occasional rocks. You strongly suspect this route belongs in the second category. Snow begins falling shortly after midday. Not heavy snow yet. Just thin white flakes drifting through grey air. Still enough to make everybody deeply uncomfortable. The blacksmith mutters that winter arrived early again. Nobody answers because everybody's busy pretending not to panic. You pass small shrines built beside dangerous sections of the trail, tiny stone alcoves holding St. statues blackened by smoke and weather. Travellers leave coins, ribbons, and prayers there asking protection from storms and avalanches. One shrine contains crude paintings showing people buried beneath snow while angels pull souls upward toward heaven, encouraging artwork choice. The path twists through a steep gorge where icy water crashes between black rocks below. Wooden railings line part of the trail, though several sections already collapsed years ago and apparently nobody felt motivated to repair them. A wagon wheel slips dangerously close to the edge. Every traveller freezes instantly. The horse snorts, scrambling for footing on wet stones while the driver shouts desperately. For one terrible moment the wagon tilts sideways toward open air, then somehow it steadies again. Nobody speaks afterward. Even the old nun looks mildly alarmed, which feels like spotting cracks in a cathedral wall. By late afternoon, snow thickens into a proper storm. Wind howls through the pass, carrying stinging ice crystals that slash across your face. Visibility shrinks rapidly. The mountains vanish behind curtains of white, while the road itself becomes difficult to distinguish from rocky slopes beside it. This is how travellers die here. Quietly, gradually, buried beneath weather that does not care about human plans. Your group pushes onward through rising drifts while boots crunch across frozen ground. Fingers ache with cold even inside gloves. Horses lower their heads against the wind. One pilgrim begins limping badly after slipping on ice. Ahead through the storm appears a faint bell sound. Then another. Relief spreads instantly. A monastery. Mountain monasteries play crucial roles in medieval travel networks. Monks maintain shelters near dangerous passes, offering food, warmth, and guidance to stranded travellers. Some religious houses even send rescue parties searching for lost people during storms. Without them, far fewer journeys succeed. You stumble toward the sound through swirling snow until dark stone walls emerge from whiteness ahead. Lanterns glow warmly beside heavy wooden doors. Monks hurry outside, helping travellers and animals into shelter, while wind screams around the buildings. Inside feels miraculous. Heat from massive fireplaces thaws frozen fingers painfully fast. Steam rises from wet cloaks hanging near flames. Monks distribute thick bread and hot broth, while exhausted travellers collapse onto benches with expressions bordering on religious revelation. One elderly monk calmly informs everyone that 2 caravans disappeared farther north last winter after ignoring storm warnings. Excellent bedtime conversation. The monastery smells wonderfully of wood smoke, soup, candle wax, and damp wool drying near fires. Compared to roadside inns, the atmosphere feels almost peaceful. No gambling, no drunken fights. Just tired humans, grateful not to freeze outside. You notice strange objects hanging along one corridor. Crude snowshoes, iron spikes, long staffs, mountain rescue equipment. A monk explains that brothers sometimes tie ropes around themselves before venturing into storms searching for missing travellers. Several never returned over the years. That silence afterward says enough. During supper, travellers trade avalanche stories in hushed voices. One merchant swears he once heard entire mountains crack open during winter storms. Another claims spirits roam certain passes, calling lost travellers by name. Medieval mountain folklore becomes wonderfully terrifying. People speak of dragons beneath glaciers, ghost processions crossing snowy ridges, and demons creating storms to punish prideful travellers. Historians still argue how literally medieval people believed such tales versus using them as symbolic warnings about natural dangers. Either way, nobody volunteers for nighttime walks outside. The storm worsens after dark. Wind rattles shutters violently while snow piles against monastery walls. Somewhere distant comes a deep rumbling sound rolling through the mountains. Avalanche. The monks pause briefly at the noise, listening carefully. Then everyone continues eating, because apparently avalanches are simply part of mountain life here. You sleep that night in a crowded dormitory beneath thick wool blankets, while storms howl beyond stone walls. Travellers snore softly nearby. Candles flicker low against ancient beams overhead. At some point during the night, bells ring urgently outside. You wake instantly. Voices echo through corridors. Doors slam. Monks hurry through the monastery carrying lanterns and ropes. a traveller arrived late, or rather half a traveller. A young man from another caravan collapsed near the pass entrance, nearly frozen solid. The rescue party drags him inside, wrapped in snow-covered cloaks, while monks rub his limbs and force warm broth between blue lips. His companions are still missing outside. Several monks prepare immediately to search despite the storm. You watch them disappear into swirling darkness carrying lanterns that quickly vanish against the endless white. And lying there beneath warm blankets, listening to the mountains roar outside, you finally understand something medieval travellers know deeply. Nature does not hate you personally. You're simply very small. The sea smells wrong. Not bad exactly, just overwhelming. Salt, fish, tar, wet rope, seaweed, smoke, rotting cargo, and something ancient lurking beneath it all. After weeks of muddy roads and mountain snow, the harbour strikes your senses like a slap. And unfortunately, you are about to trust your life to a medieval ship. The port city sprawls along the grey coastline beneath heavy clouds, crowded with warehouses, taverns, market stalls, and sailors shouting in 6 different languages simultaneously. Gulls wheel overhead, screaming like tiny furious ghosts while waves hammer wooden piers below. Everywhere, movement. Barrels rolling, crates unloading, horses panicking beside ships, drunk sailors singing at noon, a man chasing runaway chickens through fish guts. Honestly, medieval ports operate with the energy of a collapsing carnival. You follow the crowd toward the docks where vessels rock violently against moorings. Some ships look sturdy enough, others resemble floating mistakes held together by prayer and damp rope. Your ship belongs firmly in the second category. The captain proudly calls it reliable. This is not reassuring because medieval captains also consider mostly survived storms a glowing review. Sea travel becomes essential across medieval Europe despite terrifying risks. Ships move goods far faster than wagons. Merchants carry wool, wine, timber, spices and pilgrims between ports stretching from the Baltic to the Mediterranean. But medieval voyages remain brutally dangerous. Storms, pirates, reefs, disease, shipwrecks, and seasickness. Especially seasickness. You board by wobbling across a narrow plank while sailors haul cargo around you shouting insults creative enough to qualify as poetry. The deck pitches beneath your boots immediately. Ropes creak overhead. Waves slap the hull rhythmically. You already regret this. Below deck smells even worse. Imagine wet wood, spoiled food, trapped sweat, mould, fish oil, and approximately 1,000 anxious humans breathing recycled air together. Cargo crowds every available space, sacks of grain, barrels of ale, crates of cloth, cages containing deeply unhappy chickens. Passengers squeeze between supplies wherever room exists. Privacy disappears completely at sea. A sailor warns everyone to secure belongings carefully because rough weather throws objects around violently. He demonstrates this by kicking a loose bucket across the deck into somebody's ankle. Helpful lesson. The ship finally departs near sunset. Harbour bells ring softly while dock workers untie thick ropes. Wind fills patched sails overhead with loud snapping sounds. Slowly the coastline drifts backward into mist. Several passengers immediately start vomiting. Medieval ships are rarely comfortable. Most vessels lack proper sleeping quarters for ordinary travellers. Passengers huddle beneath cloaks on crowded decks exposed to weather, spray, and constant motion. Rats roam freely through cargo holds. Fresh water turns foul quickly during long voyages. Historians still argue exactly how miserable medieval sea travel felt compared to land routes, but judging by current smells, extremely miserable feels scientifically accurate. You grip the railing tightly while waves rise higher beneath darkening skies. The coastline shrinks steadily behind you until only distant lights remain visible. Then night arrives. At sea, darkness feels enormous. No village lanterns, no roadside fires, just black water stretching endlessly beneath cold stars while the ship creaks like haunted furniture. Wind whistles through rigging overhead. Waves crash against the hull with unsettling force. A pilgrim beside you quietly prays for survival. Another passenger asks whether pirates attack these waters. The sailors laugh. That reaction answers nothing positively. Piracy flourishes throughout many medieval seas. Raiders strike merchant ships, coastal villages, and isolated travellers whenever opportunities appear profitable. Vikings terrorise northern waters for centuries. Mediterranean pirates raid shipping constantly. Even supposedly peaceful traders occasionally decide robbery sounds financially efficient. The captain eventually admits pirates become less common this far north. Less common is not the same as absent. By the second day at sea, conditions worsen dramatically. Wind rises overnight. Waves grow taller. The ship begins pitching violently enough that walking becomes an athletic event. Rain lashes the deck while sailors scramble through rigging, shouting commands barely audible above roaring water. Passengers cling desperately to anything attached securely to the ship. You discover new muscles exclusively dedicated to nausea. Seasickness spreads through the vessel with horrifying efficiency. Groaning travellers collapse beside cargo barrels while sailors step over them with total indifference. One merchant swears he is dying every 15 minutes. A sailor calmly informs him that actual dying looks louder. The storm intensifies. Rain crashes sideways across the deck. Waves slam against the hull hard enough to shake teeth. The mast groans alarmingly overhead, while ropes whip through darkness like angry snakes. Then comes the sound nobody wants to hear at sea. Crack. A sail line snaps loose. Chaos erupts instantly. Sailors scramble upward into the storm while the damaged sail flaps wildly overhead. The ship lurches sideways beneath a massive wave, sending passengers crashing across the deck in screaming tangles of limbs and cargo. A chicken flies past you somehow. Not running, flying. You slam into a barrel hard enough to lose all remaining dignity. Nearby, someone desperately promises God they will become a better person if allowed to survive this storm. Classic medieval negotiation strategy. Lightning flashes across black water, revealing waves towering around the ship like moving hills. For one impossible moment you see another vessel far off through rain and darkness. Just a silhouette rising and falling violently before vanishing again. Then comes another sound, a sailor shouting, "Reef!" The captain roars orders immediately. Men haul ropes frantically while the ship turns sharply through crashing surf. Somewhere beneath the waves, jagged rocks wait ready to tear open wooden hulls like rotten fruit. Shipwrecks become terrifyingly common in medieval waters. Navigation remains limited. Storms destroy landmarks. Charts are incomplete. Entire ships vanish without trace. You grip the railing so hard your hands ache. The ship shudders violently. Passengers scream. Then somehow, impossibly, the vessel clears the reef. Barely. Hours later, the storm finally weakens toward dawn. Rain fades into drizzle while exhausted sailors collapse beside coils of rope. Passengers lie scattered across the deck looking spiritually damaged. The sea calms slowly beneath pale morning light, and there, through drifting fog ahead, appears land. Everyone stares silently at the coastline emerging from mist. Cliffs, towers, tiny harbour lights glowing faintly against grey skies. You have never loved solid ground more. A sailor nearby spits seawater overboard and mutters that the storm was not too bad. You decide sailors are fundamentally broken people. As the battered ship limps toward harbour, gulls circle overhead once again. Smoke rises from chimneys ashore. Bells ring faintly through the morning air. Another dangerous journey survived. Though judging by the smell below deck, several barrels of fish may not have been so fortunate. The city gate guards already dislike you before you even speak. You can tell by the way they stare at your muddy boots, damp cloak and exhausted face, while gripping spears with professional suspicion. Behind them rises another unfamiliar medieval town surrounded by thick stone walls and crowded towers. Smoke drifts above rooftops. Church bells echo faintly through cold morning air. And somewhere inside this city are laws you absolutely do not understand. That is the problem with medieval Europe. Every kingdom, duchy, bishopric, and ambitious little town invents its own rules. Cross one river and suddenly your coins are wrong. Your clothing is offensive, your accent sounds suspicious, and apparently you violated local bread regulations without realizing it. Travellers constantly risk accidental trouble. The The guards inspect your group carefully while demanding toll payments. One merchant produces official papers sealed with wax. Another offers extra coins discreetly, which the guards accept with the smooth efficiency of men who practice corruption regularly. Then the questions begin. Where are you from? Where are you going? Why? Do you carry weapons? Have you visited plague regions recently? Do you know anything about missing livestock north of the river? That last one feels oddly specific. Eventually the gates open with a deep groaning sound, and your group enters the city beneath archways blackened by centuries of smoke. Immediately the noise hits you, hammering, shouting, church bells, market vendors yelling prices, dogs barking, wagon wheels grinding over cobblestones. After weeks on lonely roads, medieval cities feel overwhelming. Crowded, loud, cramped, and constantly moving. Narrow streets twist unpredictably between leaning timber buildings whose upper floors nearly touch overhead. Laundry hangs from windows. Chamber pots occasionally empty into gutters with terrifying lack of warning. You learn to watch upper windows carefully. The smells arrive next. Fresh bread from bakeries, smoke from blacksmith forges, fish markets, tanning pits, human waste flowing through open drains, spices from merchant stalls, wet wool steaming in workshops. Cities smell alive and slightly diseased. A local guide immediately approaches offering directions for money. Another offers safe lodging. A third quietly suggests gambling opportunities involving dice and a suspiciously confident rooster. You decline the rooster situation. Medieval towns operate according to layers of customs unfamiliar to outsiders. Some cities forbid carrying weapons after dark. Others enforce strict curfews. Certain marketplaces regulate clothing colours based on class. Guilds control who may sell goods and where. Historians still argue how strictly many urban laws were enforced in daily life versus existing mostly as ambitious paperwork ignored whenever inconvenient. But travellers rarely want to test the system personally, especially not after spotting the city jail. You pass it near the marketplace. Squat stone walls, narrow barred windows, and a smell suggesting nobody inside is enjoying themselves. Outside stands a wooden pillory where offenders are publicly punished, while crowds throw insults, rotten vegetables, and occasionally worse. A man currently locked inside the pillory wears a sign reading "cheated with false weights." Several children pelt him enthusiastically with cabbage leaves. Medieval justice loves audience participation. The marketplace itself spreads across a broad muddy square crowded with traders from distant regions. Flemish cloth merchants bargain beside Italian bankers. Fishermen shout beside barrels of herring. A spice seller proudly displays pepper worth nearly its weight in silver. Travel creates these networks. Dangerous roads and stormy seas somehow connect thousands of communities into sprawling trade systems stretching across continents. And every traveller carries stories. You overhear rumours everywhere. War in the east, floods along the Rhine, bandits near mountain passes, a noblewoman supposedly poisoned by her own physician. Nobody knows which stories are true anymore. News changes slightly every time someone repeats it. A merchant warns your group carefully about local laws regarding taverns. Apparently foreigners caught fighting after curfew face heavy fines. This becomes relevant almost immediately. By evening, your travellers crowd into a busy tavern near the docks where sailors gamble beside roaring fires. Oil flows freely. Musicians play badly. Somebody dances on a table with dangerous confidence. Then two drunk apprentices start arguing over card games. One accuses the other of cheating. Ah yes, medieval civilization continues. The fight erupts fast. Benches overturn. Ale mugs fly. A sailor somehow loses one shoe. Tavern keepers and several surprisingly enthusiastic old women rush forward, swinging broom handles at everyone equally. You wisely retreat toward the wall, then city watchmen arrive. Silence crashes across the tavern almost instantly. The watch carries clubs and lanterns, while looking deeply tired of humanity. They drag several fighters outside into the street where more shouting follows. One unlucky sailor gets hauled away still clutching half a sausage. A local traveller quietly explains that punishment depends entirely on which official hears the case tomorrow, encouraging legal system. Outside, night settles across the city beneath torchlight and drifting fog. Gates close until dawn. Curfew bells ring from church towers overhead. Streets empty gradually except for patrols, drunk sailors, and people making questionable life choices. You follow the innkeeper upstairs toward rented sleeping quarters. The room is tiny. 3 straw mattresses, 1 candle, a window barely larger than a loaf of bread. Luxury by medieval standards. From outside comes the distant sound of singing somewhere along the harbour. Then another sound drifts faintly through the streets below. A bell. Slow. Repeated. The innkeeper pauses briefly while crossing himself. Someone died. Funeral bells ring often in medieval towns where disease, accidents, violence, and bad luck remain constant companions. Travellers become accustomed to death existing nearby in casual ways modern people might find unsettling. Life expectancy shapes everything differently. Later that night, unable to sleep, you peer through the tiny window overlooking narrow streets below. Moonlight glimmers across wet cobblestones. A patrol lantern swings slowly through fog near the marketplace. Then you spot movement farther down the alley. 2 shadowy figures carrying something heavy between them wrapped in cloth. A body? Maybe. Or stolen goods. Or both. The figures disappear quickly into darkness. Historians still argue how dangerous medieval cities truly were after dark compared to exaggerated literary depictions of urban crime. Some towns maintain surprisingly organised policing systems. Others basically surrender nighttime streets to thieves and chaos. Watching those shadows vanish, you decide caution feels appropriate either way. You finally lie back upon the straw mattress while city sounds drift faintly through walls. Distant bells, barking dogs, muffled voices, wagon wheels somewhere beyond the harbour. Tomorrow the roads continue again. New laws, new dangers. New places where one wrong word or wrong coin might suddenly become your problem. Because travelling through medieval Europe means constantly being foreign somewhere, and foreign people rarely receive the benefit of the doubt. The market steals from you before breakfast. Not dramatically. No masked thief leaps from shadows waving daggers, while church bells ring ominously. Medieval crime usually works with far less theatrical effort. You simply realise, halfway through buying bread, that several coins vanished from your pouch sometime during the morning crowd. Gone. Just like that. You stare down at the remaining money with the hollow expression of someone discovering history's oldest customer service problem. The market around you surges endlessly with movement. Traders shout over one another beneath striped awnings, while muddy boots splash through narrow lanes, packed shoulder to shoulder with buyers, animals, beggars, monks, sailors, and children, sprinting dangerously between wagon wheels. Cities across medieval Europe become crowded commercial centres, where goods from astonishing distances appear together. Baltic amber, English wool, Mediterranean spices, German metalwork, silk from farther east than most travellers will ever see, and wherever wealth gathers, thieves arrive enthusiastically. The merchant selling your bread barely reacts to your complaint. He simply shrugs and says, "Crowded markets teach expensive lessons. Helpful man." You tighten your grip on the money pouch immediately. A local guide walking beside your group points subtly towards several boys weaving through the crowd carrying baskets. "Watch them," he mutters. One bumps accidentally into a merchant moments later. Another hand slips neatly toward the merchant's belt. Professional work. Pickpocketing flourishes in medieval cities, especially around ports and market districts where travellers carry cash and remain distracted by unfamiliar surroundings. Some thieves work in groups. Others use trained children because authorities punish them less severely. Historians still argue how organised medieval urban crime truly became, but court records reveal networks of fences, gamblers, smugglers, and thieves operating across major towns surprisingly efficiently. Human beings industrialise bad decisions very quickly. The market square itself feels enormous compared to rural villages. Permanent stone shops line the edges while temporary stalls crowd every remaining space. Butchers chop meat beneath buzzing flies. Fishmongers dump crushed ice over silver-scaled catches hauled from distant seas. Apothecaries display jars filled with herbs, powders, oils, and substances that absolutely should not be swallowed by anyone. One bottle contains powdered mummy. Apparently medieval medicine occasionally imports actual ground-up Egyptian remains, because someone once decided ancient corpses sounded healthy. You avoid that stall. Nearby, travelling entertainers draw crowds with trained monkeys, juggling tricks, and puppet shows mocking local nobles very carefully, without crossing into execution territory. A musician plays bagpipes loudly enough to alarm nearby horses. The old nun travelling with you claims bagpipes themselves may be divine punishment. Reasonable theory. As noon approaches, the crowd thickens further. Heat rises from packed bodies despite cool weather. Voices blur together into constant noise. Somewhere a pig escapes its handler and charges through vegetable stalls, scattering cabbages like cannon fire. Several children cheer wildly. A merchant absolutely does not. You pass beneath colourful banners hanging between buildings advertising guild halls and workshops. Guilds dominate many medieval towns. Powerful organisations controlling trades like weaving, blacksmithing, baking, and carpentry. Foreign merchants often face strict regulations about where they may sell goods and how long they may stay. Your blacksmith companion complains that local guild rules are basically legalised bullying. A local blacksmith overhears immediately and starts arguing. This continues for nearly 15 minutes. Medieval craftsmen take professional pride very seriously. By afternoon, clouds gather overhead while bells ring, announcing public punishments near the square. Crowds drift eagerly toward the spectacle because humans remain deeply committed to watching consequences happen to other people. You follow reluctantly. A platform has been erected beside the market cross where several prisoners stand guarded by city officials. One thief receives whipping for repeated pickpocketing. Another man wears a humiliating paper hat declaring him guilty of selling watered wine. The crowd laughs mercilessly. Public punishments become social theatre throughout medieval Europe. Authorities believe humiliation deters crime while conveniently entertaining everyone at the same time. Stocks, pillories, whippings, fines. Justice happens publicly because secrecy feels suspicious. One prisoner catches rotten fruit directly in the face. The old nun mutters that people enjoy cruelty too much. She's probably right. Rain finally begins during the punishments, sending crowds scattering beneath awnings and tavern roofs. You duck into a covered arcade lined with money changers, counting coins from half the kingdoms in Europe. Currency becomes another travel nightmare. Every region mints different coins with varying silver content, confusing values, and rulers whose faces all somehow look equally disappointed. Travellers constantly exchange money while worrying about counterfeits, clipped coins, or dishonest scales. A money changer offers rates so terrible they feel personally insulting. The merchants in your group nearly start another argument. Instead, everyone escapes toward a nearby tavern before the rain worsens. Inside, warmth and noise swallow you immediately. Sailors gamble beside smoky lanterns while merchants argue over trade routes stretching from the Baltic Sea to Italy. Maps cover one wall marked with ports, roads, and dangerous regions. You overhear stories from every direction. A caravan robbed in Bohemia, pirates near the Channel, snow-blocking mountain passes earlier than expected, a ship carrying exotic animals sinking off the coast somewhere south. That last story includes a camel reportedly swimming ashore alive and terrifying fishermen for weeks afterward. Historians genuinely record occasional bizarre incidents, like escaped exotic animals wandering medieval Europe after shipwrecks or royal gifts gone wrong. Imagine being a peasant who has never seen anything stranger than a cow and suddenly encountering an angry camel in coastal fog. You would absolutely believe demons arrived. As evening deepens, the tavern grows louder and more crowded. Dice clatter across tables. A sailor sings horribly about lost love and fish. Someone starts arm wrestling competitively near the fire. Then the screaming begins outside. Everyone turns instantly toward the shutters. More shouting follows. Running footsteps. A bell ringing fast through the streets. Fire. That single word changes the atmosphere immediately. Medieval cities fear fire constantly. Timber buildings stand packed tightly together beneath thatched roofs while candles, hearths and workshops burn day and night. One spark during dry weather can destroy entire neighbourhoods. People rush outside into rain-dark streets where smoke rises several blocks away. Citizens form frantic bucket lines while bells continue ringing alarms through the city. Flames glow orange against low clouds between rooftops. You help carry water alongside merchants, sailors, monks, and bakers. while sparks drift through wet night air. The fire spreads frighteningly fast before rain finally begins slowing it. Hours later, exhausted crowds watch black smoke curl upward from ruined buildings. Families huddle beside salvaged belongings in muddy streets. Children cry softly beneath blankets. One man simply stares at ashes where his workshop stood that morning. Travel teaches you something uncomfortable about medieval life. Disaster rarely announces itself dramatically. Sometimes danger is not wolves, storms, or bandits. Sometimes it is one overturned candle in a crowded wooden city. And by morning, the market will reopen anyway. Because medieval Europe never really stops moving. You do not realise how loud darkness can be until you sleep outside again. After crowded cities and noisy taverns, the countryside initially feels peaceful. Fresh air replaces smoke and sewage. Open fields stretch beneath pale autumn skies. The road leaves the city gates behind and wanders into lonely farmland broken only by scattered villages and distant forests, turning gold and black beneath gathering clouds. Then night arrives, and suddenly every sound matters. Your group camps beside a narrow stream at the edge of an old woodland because the nearest inn lies too far ahead. Wagons form a rough circle again, while travellers unpack blankets and cooking pots with the exhausted efficiency of people who have repeated this ritual too many times already. The blacksmith gathers firewood. The pilgrim mutters evening prayers. The old nun somehow produces onions from nowhere, which feels less like cooking and more like sorcery at this point. You help build the fire while cold wind rustles through dark trees nearby. Sparks drift upward into deepening twilight. Somewhere far off, crows argue noisily before settling for the night. For a little while, camp almost feels cosy. Almost. Stew bubbles softly over flames while travellers loosen boots and complain about roads, tolls, weather, and humanity in general. Someone passes around weak ale. Another traveller begins telling ghost stories immediately because medieval people apparently hear isolated forest camp and think, perfect time for supernatural terror. Tonight's story involves a headless monk haunting crossroads after execution for forbidden alchemy. Naturally. Medieval Europe overflows with nighttime legends. Travellers swap tales about spirits, demons, fairy lights, cursed ruins, and wandering dead, partly for entertainment, and partly because dark roads genuinely feel haunted after sunset. Without modern lighting, forests become oceans of shadow where imagination fills every unseen corner. Historians still argue how literally ordinary medieval people believed such stories versus treating them as cautionary folklore. But lying beside dark woods with wolves somewhere nearby, you discover skepticism weakens remarkably fast. The fire burns lower as stars emerge overhead, and then the noises begin. Branches cracking in darkness, water moving through reeds, wind sighing through trees, something hooting nearby. Every sound feels personal somehow. One horse suddenly jerks its head upright, ears twitching toward the forest. Several others follow immediately. Animals notice things humans miss. Travellers exchange nervous glances around the firelight. The blacksmith grips a roasting stick like a weapon. You stare into the woods where shadows layer endlessly between trunks. Nothing appears. Probably. A merchant finally laughs awkwardly and says everyone is becoming ridiculous. The tension eases slightly. Then comes a howl. Long, distant, unmistakably wolf. Conversation dies instantly. Wolves remain widespread across much of medieval Europe, especially in remote forests and mountains. During harsh winters or famines, packs occasionally attack livestock, and more rarely isolated humans. Chroniclers describe wolves scavenging battlefields and prowling near villages during cold seasons. One pilgrim quietly pulls his blanket tighter around himself. The old nun continues eating stew unimpressed. Honestly, if wolves attacked the camp directly, you suspect she would lecture them into retreat. The howl comes again, closer this time. Then another answers deeper in the forest. The horses shift nervously beside the wagons while travellers add more wood to the fire. Flames leap higher, throwing wild shadows across faces and tree trunks. Medieval camps rely heavily on fire for protection, against animals, thieves, cold, and whatever else might lurk beyond the light. A young traveller swears he sees movement between the trees. Nobody else sees it. That does not help. To calm nerves, the blacksmith starts telling stories from earlier journeys. He once travelled with merchants through eastern forests where locals supposedly hung iron charms above roads to repel forest spirits. Another traveller claims certain crossroads become dangerous after midnight because demons gather there invisibly. A sailor passing through your group snorts at all this and says the sea contains worse things than forests ever could. Then he describes hearing voices singing beside his ship during fog without any visible boats nearby. Excellent contribution. Hours pass slowly. One by one, travellers settle into blankets near fading fires, while assigned guards remain awake watching the darkness. You try sleeping. Impossible. The ground feels made entirely of the rocks. Cold air slips beneath your cloak constantly. Every snap of burning wood jerks your attention awake again, and the noises continue. At some point after midnight, rain begins softly. Not heavy rain, just steady dripping through leaves and onto blankets. Firelight shrinks lower while mist gathers among trees around the camp. Shapes blur strangely at the edges of visibility. Then comes another sound. Footsteps. Definitely footsteps this time. Slow movement circling beyond the wagons. The guard stands immediately gripping his spear. Others wake too, confused and alarmed. Horses snort sharply while everyone stares into darkness beyond the dying fire. Crunch. Another step. Closer now. A lantern gets raised higher, and there, just beyond the circle of light, stands a figure. Tall, motionless, wearing what appears to be a hooded cloak dripping with rainwater. Nobody speaks. The figure remains still for several terrible seconds before finally raising one hand slowly. A traveller beside you whispers a prayer. Then the figure speaks. "Road flooded northward," the stranger calls hoarsely. "Bridge washed out." Just a traveller. Not a ghost, not a demon. Merely a soaked messenger warning nearby camps before continuing south. The collective relief nearly knocks the tension out of everyone physically. Several travellers begin laughing shakily. One man actually applauds. The messenger accepts stew and warms himself briefly beside the fire before moving onward again into darkness. Still unsettling though. By now nobody sleeps deeply anymore. Rain falls steadily. Wolves howl farther away. Guards keep staring toward the woods every few minutes as though expecting something else to emerge. You lie awake watching embers glow red beneath drifting smoke. And slowly you understand why medieval travellers cling so tightly to saints, charms, rituals and stories. Because night outside the firelight feels enormous. The world beyond camp seems filled with hidden movement, animals, strangers, weather, spirits, memories. Real dangers and imagined ones blend together after dark until separating them hardly matters anymore. Somewhere near dawn, exhaustion finally pulls you towards sleep. And just before drifting off, you hear one last sound from deep within the forest. Laughter. Or maybe only wind moving through trees. In medieval Europe, certainty becomes a luxury few travellers can afford. By now you carry superstitions without even noticing. At some point during endless roads, storms, suspicious inns, and nighttime wolf concerts, your careful, practical mind quietly surrendered territory to medieval travel rituals. You touch the saint charm hanging near your cloak before crossing bridges. You avoid mentioning good weather aloud because storms seem to hear insults personally. You sleep facing the fire whenever possible, and when someone warns a certain road feels cursed, you absolutely pay attention. The journey continues beneath low grey skies, through remote countryside where villages grow smaller and forests thicker again. Winter presses closer each morning now. Frost coats dead grass at dawn while travellers breathe pale clouds into icy air. A shepherd you pass beside the road immediately spits over his shoulder after learning your route ahead. Bad omen. Apparently a traveller was found dead near the old watchtower last month. Maybe robbed, maybe frozen, maybe something else. The shepherd refuses to elaborate further and hurries his sheep away looking deeply uncomfortable. Wonderful conversation starter. Medieval Europeans interpret signs constantly. A raven crossing your path, church bells ringing unexpectedly, dreams involving water, sudden storms, broken wagon wheels. Everything potentially means something. Travel especially encourages superstition because roads contain so many genuine dangers. People naturally search for patterns explaining survival. Historians still argue how deeply magical thinking shaped everyday medieval decisions, versus coexisting alongside practical reasoning. But when roads regularly kill people through weather, disease, violence, and accidents, Lucky Charms start feeling surprisingly reasonable. The old nun claims faith protects travellers better than superstition. Then she absolutely refuses to walk beneath a leaning dead tree because it looks unlucky. Humans remain consistent across centuries. Near midday, your group reaches the ruins of a Roman milestone half swallowed by moss beside the road. Ancient roads and ruins haunt medieval Europe constantly. Broken aqueducts, crumbling forts, abandoned villas, reminders of civilizations grander and older than many local kingdoms. Some medieval people believe giants built Roman structures because ordinary humans could not possibly move such stones. Honestly, standing before ruined arches disappearing into fog, you almost understand the logic. A young traveller notices carved symbols scratched into the milestone recently. Protective marks against evil spirits according to local custom. Similar symbols appear throughout medieval Europe on barns, doors, bridges and inns. People carve circles, crosses, stars and strange patterns, believing they repel demons, witches, storms or bad luck. The blacksmith quietly carves one onto a wagon afterward, just in case. The road climbs gradually toward dark hills where ruined towers rise against cloudy skies. Local villagers warn travellers not to linger near the old fortress after sunset, because lights supposedly appear there at night. Bandits, perhaps, or smugglers, or ghosts if you ask literally anyone over the age of 50. You pass a roadside shrine crowded with offerings, ribbons tied to branches, tiny carved animals, coins pressed into cracks. Someone left fresh bread there recently. Another traveller explains locals believe the nearby spring cures fevers if visited on certain saint days. Pilgrimage and folk belief blend together constantly in medieval Europe. Official church teachings coexist with older customs, local legends, charms, and strange rituals surviving from generations past. One merchant quietly admits his wife hangs garlic above windows during storms to keep witches away. Another traveller immediately insists garlic only works against river spirits. An argument follows. Somehow this becomes the most passionate debate all week. By late afternoon, fog thickens across the hills until the world shrinks into pale grey silence. The road narrows between ancient trees twisted by wind and age. Frost crunches beneath boots. Even the horses seem uneasy. Then the bells begin, soft at first, distant. A slow ringing drifting through fog somewhere ahead. Nobody speaks immediately. The sound continues irregularly, impossible to place exactly. A pilgrim crosses himself. The blacksmith mutters that no village should be nearby according to maps. One traveller quietly suggests turning back before dark. The old nun squints into fog and finally sighs. "Cowbells," she announces. Sure enough, moments later a herd of cattle emerges from the mist, led by a bored-looking boy carrying a stick. The relief feels slightly embarrassing. Still, nobody laughs much afterward, because fear grows easily on medieval roads. As evening approaches, your group reaches an isolated inn built beside the ruins of an old chapel. The innkeeper greets travellers warmly enough, but insists everyone remain indoors after dark because the hills are restless tonight. You would normally dismiss this as local storytelling designed to sell extra ale. Unfortunately, the innkeeper seems genuinely nervous. Inside, firelight flickers across crowded walls blackened by smoke. Travellers huddle close beside the hearth while wind moans outside around ancient stone ruins nearby. The atmosphere feels quieter tonight somehow, more listening than talking. An old shepherd sitting near the fire finally explains the local fears. Years ago, several travellers vanished during winter storms near the ruined watchtower uphill. Since then, strange lights supposedly wander the hills at night, calling people into the fog. Marsh gas perhaps. Or smugglers again. Or exhausted humans seeing things in bad weather. Historians still argue how many supernatural medieval stories began as distorted memories of real dangers. Bandits, storms, disappearances, strange natural phenomena, gradually transformed into folklore through repetition. The shepherd insists one man followed the lights, and returned days later unable to speak properly ever again. That detail silences the room nicely. Later, after supper, you step briefly outside into the freezing night air. Fog blankets the hills completely. Moonlight glows faintly overhead through shifting clouds, while frost sparkles silver across dead grass. The ruined chapel stands crooked beside the inn, its broken bell tower black against the sky. And then you see it. Far uphill. A light moving slowly through the fog. Tiny. Flickering. Yellow. You stare for several seconds while cold wind slips beneath your cloak. The light drifts sideways strangely before vanishing completely. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. Just darkness again. You return indoors immediately because curiosity is how medieval travellers end up becoming ghost stories themselves. The innkeeper bars the doors heavily for the night. Travellers settle uneasily beneath blankets while wind rattles shutters, hard enough to sound almost human at times. Somebody quietly prays nearby. Another traveller slips a lucky charm beneath his pillow. And lying awake beside fading firelight, listening to ancient buildings groan in the winter wind, you realise something important. On dangerous roads, superstition becomes less about believing impossible things, and more about feeling slightly less helpless in a world that rarely promises safety. By the time winter finally settles across the roads of Europe, you stop measuring distance normally. Not in miles, not in days. You measure journeys by survivals. One bridge crossed without collapsing. One forest passed without robbers. One storm endured. One fever escaped. One more dawn waking beneath a roof instead of buried beneath snow somewhere nameless beside the road. Travel changes people quietly like that. The countryside unfolding ahead now looks colder than anything you remember from the beginning of the journey. Frost hardens muddy tracks into jagged ruts. Bare trees claw against pale skies. Thin smoke rises from isolated cottages, where families huddle indoors beside precious fires. Most sensible people stay home during winter. You, unfortunately, stopped being sensible several thousand words ago. Your smaller travel group continues slowly southward, through frozen farmland toward a distant walled town barely visible through drifting mist. Many companions from earlier roads vanished gradually along the journey. Some took different routes. Some stayed behind in cities or monasteries. One merchant died from fever weeks ago, and now rests beneath a roadside cross nobody except your group will ever recognise. The road keeps moving anyway. That feels important somehow. A cold wind whistles across empty fields, carrying loose snow through broken hedges. Your boots crunch over frozen mud, while horses exhale white clouds into the morning air. Nobody talks much anymore. Winter travel steals unnecessary conversation first. Ahead beside the road stands another gallows. Empty this time. Crows still perch there waiting patiently. Medieval roads remain lined with reminders that safety is temporary. Shrines, graves, burned villages, abandoned wagons sinking slowly into mud beside forgotten routes. Entire lives scattered across Europe by trade, pilgrimage, war, hope, hunger. Historians still argue how medieval people emotionally understood travel itself. For nobles and merchants, journeys often meant opportunity. For peasants, roads frequently represented danger, exile, taxes, war or uncertainty. Yet movement never truly stops. Europe remains connected by endless human motion despite every hardship trying to prevent it. You feel that now while walking beneath grey skies. The road matters because people keep choosing it anyway. Near midday, your group passes a frozen pond where villagers chop ice using heavy axes. Children stop working briefly to stare at the travellers. One little girl asks where you came from. You realise the answer is complicated now. Cities, forests, rivers, mountains, storms. 100 places blur together into one long muddy memory. The old nun travelling beside you laughs softly and says all travellers eventually become ghosts between destinations. Honestly, that sounds exactly like something a medieval nun would say moments before terrifying everyone accidentally. Snow begins falling again by afternoon. Soft at first, then thicker. The distant town walls disappear behind swirling white, while travellers pull cloaks tighter against rising wind. A wagon wheel strikes frozen ground awkwardly and snaps with a loud crack. Nobody even curses anymore. Everyone simply stops and starts repairing it automatically, because medieval travel eventually trains exhaustion into routine. While the blacksmith works, You stare back along the road, stretching into whiteness behind you. Somewhere beyond those hills lie crowded markets, stormy seas, mountain monasteries, flea-ridden inns, haunted forests, pilgrimage roads glowing with candlelight, and countless travellers still moving through them all, messengers carrying war news, pilgrims chasing miracles, merchants risking fortunes, runaways fleeing old lives, soldiers marching toward battles, children seeing the sea for the first time, people disappearing forever. Because many medieval travellers never return home, ships vanish during storms, caravans disappear in mountain snow, disease sweeps through inns, bandits attack isolated roads. Sometimes people simply begin new lives elsewhere because returning becomes impossible or undesirable. The medieval world remains vast enough that losing someone entirely is frighteningly easy. A pilgrim once travelling with your group told a story about his brother leaving for Rome 20 years earlier and never coming back. No letter, no grave, nothing. Just absence stretched across roads and years. That uncertainty haunts medieval families constantly. The repaired wagon finally creaks forward again as snow deepens around your boots. Dusk approaches early beneath thick winter clouds. Wolves howl faintly somewhere distant across frozen fields. Still out there. Always out there. At last the town gates emerge through snowfall near sunset. Lanterns glowing warmly above stone walls. Guards wave weary travellers inside before darkness fully settles. You enter beneath archways crusted with ice, while church bells ring softly through evening fog. Safe again. For tonight. Inside the walls, streets bustle with winter life. Bakers pull steaming loaves from ovens. Smoke curls from chimneys. Taverns glow gold behind frosted windows, while exhausted travellers crowd gratefully toward warmth and food. You step into one final inn where firelight dances across familiar scenes. Muddy boots drying near flames, merchants arguing quietly, pilgrims whispering prayers before supper, strangers exchanging road stories that grow slightly more dramatic with every retelling. The innkeeper hands you hot stew thick with onions and barley. It tastes like survival. Outside, snow continues falling across roofs and silent roads beyond the gates. Somewhere out there, another traveller still walks through darkness carrying a lantern against endless winter fields. And slowly, while warmth settles back into frozen hands, you understand the strangest thing about medieval travel. Despite everything, the danger, sickness, hunger, storms, fear, people continue journeying because movement changes how they see the world. Roads connect lonely villages to distant kingdoms. Pilgrims bring stories home. Merchants carry ideas alongside goods. Travel spreads languages, songs, inventions, rumours, religions, recipes, fears. Even disasters travel. Especially disasters. The medieval world survives through motion despite constantly punishing anyone brave enough to move through it. The fire crackles lower beside you while snow taps softly against shutters. Travellers nearby drift gradually towards sleep wrapped in blankets and exhaustion. Someone snores gently near the hearth. A horse stamps in the stable outside, and at long last, after all the dangerous roads stretching across Europe, you finally allow yourself to rest. The night feels quieter now, softer. Far away beyond the walls, winter wind moves through forests and over empty bridges, across frozen rivers and forgotten milestones, carrying the footsteps of travellers who never stopped walking. You imagine those endless roads fading slowly into darkness beneath falling snow, winding through silent valleys, disappearing into forests lit only by moonlight and distant lanterns, stretching onward long after fires burn low and voices fall silent. And now the journey finally begins to drift away from you too. The cold roads soften into memory. The bells grow faint. The wolves become distant echoes beneath the wind. Your boots no longer ache quite so much. The fire glows warmly against heavy eyelids, while the ancient world settles gently into stillness around you. Stone walls, snowy rooftops, sleeping horses, quiet monasteries tucked high in mountains, lonely shrines beside forgotten roads, ships rocking softly in dark harbours beneath winter stars. Everything slowing, everything dimming, until there is only warmth, soft wind, and the feeling of having safely arrived somewhere at last.